Hello. Today's episode number 31 of the Professor Slots podcast provides a Foxwoods casino trip report, plus slot machine casino gambling in the great U.S. state of Nebraska. Thank you for joining me for the Professor Slots podcast show. I'm John Friedel, and this is the podcast about slot machine casino gambling. It is where I provide the knowledge, insights, and tools for helping you improve your slot machine gambling performance. Show notes are available within most podcast apps or at professorslots.com/E31.
John Friedel from the Professor Slots blog reveals all his tips and tricks for thriving in the casino environment. Choose winning slot machines and identify your gambling goals. Being entertained, earning comps, winning take-home cash, or combining them. John has won 90 taxable jackpots and a luxury car in 9 months of slot play and made a profit at slots gambling since 2013.
In case you missed it, on last week's episode, I went over winning small at Foxwoods Casino. In it, I explained exactly how I figured out how to win small jackpots at Foxwoods. Also last week, I reviewed Montana slot machine casino gambling, including how slot machines don't exist in that state. Not exactly as traditional slot machines anyway, but there are 1,400 locations offering video poker, video keno, and video bingo electronic gaming machines. I hope you enjoyed listening to my last episode as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Remember to visit professorslots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Let's get started with the first segment of the show, Foxwoods Trip Report 2018. I attended Cousin Vito's Casino Podcast's Gamblepalooza event in Connecticut on April 19th through 22nd of 2018, from which I've created for you this Casino Trip Report 2018. While at Foxwoods, I learned how to win at slots at Foxwoods. I participated in a high-limit slots pool in which I had a special role. I was taught how to play craps by Mark from You Can Bet on That. I met my fans and made new ones. And I spent quality time with my fellow gambling podcasters. For those specifically interested in how to win at slots at Foxwoods, I've already taken the liberty of providing all the winning details in both a blog article, How to Easily Win a Little at Slots at Foxwoods Casino, as well as Professor Slots Podcast episode number 30, How to Win Small at Foxwoods, Montana Slots 2018. Providing useful information to my audience of slot enthusiasts comes first, right? The intent of this segment is to provide a perspective of what can be learned the first time visiting a casino, in this case Foxwoods Casino, as well as what was learned. I can split what I learned into 2 basic perspectives, what I observed as a slots player and what I learned from watching non-exclusive slots players, that is to say craps, blackjack, roulette, and poker players, when they play slot machines. This segment has the following subsections. 1. An introduction. 2. Learning to win at Foxwoods. 3. High-limit slots pull event observations. 4. Thoughts on craps. 5. Meeting fans of Professor Slots. And 6. A summary. As described in my last podcast episode, learning to win at slots at Foxwoods Casino started off by simply walking around the casino grounds for hours and hours. I didn't have a map, nor did I want one. I was simply observing, because that's useful. I was trying to get a feel for the place. After a few hours of this, and making the observation detailed in the last podcast episode, I heard someone call out, "Professor Slots!" It's interesting meeting fellow podcasters for the first time. You generally have no idea who they are until they speak. Then, for me, I generally think they are taller than I expected them to be. But you do recognize the sound of their voice. It was Mark and Dr. Mike from the You Can Bet on That gambling podcast for the recreational gambler that called out to me when I was walking around. Specifically, Mark had spotted me. By the way, likely because of my Professor Slots shirt, that's all I was ever called during this trip to Foxwoods Casino, Professor Slots. On their follow-up podcast episode, Mark and Dr. Mike were kind enough to mention I'd acted as a guide for them to get them over to the other side of the casino where everyone was. I'd like to give a special thanks to Mark for adding my name after Professor Slots on that follow-up episode. That was unexpected and appreciated. Plus, he pronounced Friedel correctly. Anyway, learning to win at Foxwoods was a step-by-step process, starting with a long walk, talking with winning slots players, questioning casino staff, and then applying all this to create a winning strategy. You can find this careful explanation in episode 30, my last podcast episode. On Saturday, after a late morning group breakfast, Eric Rosenthal from the Vegas Confessions podcast had organized a high-limit slot pull for this Gamblepalooza event. This event had been planned by Cousin Vito for some time, with Eric using his vast experience from other meetup events to help run this slot pull. Not to bore you with the details of successfully organizing such an event, quite a few interesting tidbits stand out, which I think you might find of interest. Prior to the event, I wondered if anyone would ask Professor Slots for his opinion. First off, my current understanding is that Eric had a bet with Vito about how many people would attend this late morning breakfast. I did mention these were all gamblers, right? In the follow-up podcasts that I have since come out, I learned that this bet existed. And at the time, I didn't know there was a group breakfast. I didn't, that is, until Eric saw me in the hallway that morning saying that there was one. I attended when asked, of course, and that did help Eric win. Again, I did mention these were gamblers, right? And gamblers like to win. With that connection, I sat with Eric and his wife at breakfast and had a few moments to explain what I'd learned about winning at slots at Foxwoods Casino so far in the trip. When I suggested moving from slot machine to win a little at each, Eric kindly explained to me that doing so would be unpopular with the crowd. Lynching is such an ugly word, don't you think? But during the event itself, Eric was able to try a few of my suggestions. I don't think they helped much, but the high-limit slots pull didn't occur in the casino I would have picked. It took place in one of the older casinos, as it happens. So, with everyone gathered around, Eric started off the event by carefully reading through the rules none of us had actually read. Basically, the plan was anyone who cared to could pay in one or more shares of $100. Altogether, about 30 people had purchased 44 shares in total. Therefore, in his hand, Eric had $4,400. Another agreement amongst the group was to either double our money or spend it all. Unless we went over $8,800 at any point, we would spend it all. Cool, huh? Quickly, I should mention that they needed a volunteer to accept the tax burden for any taxable jackpot won. I have to say, I was a little shocked when nobody volunteered. When I saw this, I naturally stepped forward and volunteered. The applause was nice. The next step was Eric recommending that it would be my player's club card in the machine to get the associated reward points for betting these thousands of dollars. I declined, pointing out I wasn't a regular at Foxwoods. I counter-suggested that it should be the rewards club card of our host, Vito. Again, the applause was nice. To help speed things along, Eric had inserted 20 of the $100 bills to create a $2,000 voucher. I don't know if you know this, but some states have a limit on how much can be in a slot machine at any one time. In Ohio, and it seems Connecticut, the limit is $3,000. So, with $2,400 in the slot machine and $2,000 on a voucher held by Eric, the high-limit slot pull began on a $100 denomination, 1 credit, Wheel of Fortune slot machine. Again, quickly, several small 2-credit wins took place over time. With 17 credits left on the slot machine and Eric's $2,000 voucher yet unused, the slot machine landed on a spin. Up to this point, the crowd had been fairly excited, but that excitement had died down a bit over time. However, landing on a bonus spin where a relatively large jackpot was assured, anywhere from about $2,500 to $25,000, I was going to get a taxable jackpot. Once spun, we got a $4,500 hand pay jackpot. Filling out paperwork took a while, as it always does, and handing over the stack of 45 $100 bills to Eric from my open palm to his was somewhat painful, but those were the rules. So we kept playing. Again, more 1 and 2 credit jackpots were won. However, no more taxable jackpots were won. We even switched to another slot machine or two. Top dollar, I believe. We even sped it up by just letting one person press the button on the slot machine. We did this until all the money was gone. With all that as a description, this is what I noticed during the slot pull. People got bored. Very bored. Apparently, this wasn't very exciting, except when it was very exciting. The comments I heard were, "When will this be over?" and "Can't we go any faster?" Eric had been right. It could devolve into a lynching real fast. Eric helped move it along a bit, and everybody settled down, but I was struck with these observations. Craps and blackjack players really don't know how to play slots. Honestly, it's not entirely about pushing a button or pulling a lever. What I saw was completely different than boredom. I saw many small wins, meaning we'd picked a fairly good winning slot machine. I saw a hand pay after having only made 20 bets. Things are going great. Where we went wrong, if I might be so bold, was not having a large enough bankroll to make 100 to 120 bets on a one-credit, $100 denomination slot machine. Yes, we brought the original $4,400 bankroll, added a $4,500 hand pay, and won 1 and 2 credit jackpots perhaps 10 times. So we made nearly 120 bets overall. But that's not good. As I've discussed in the past, we need to be able to make 100 to 120 bets with our original bankroll in order to play the machine for long enough to have a fair chance of winning. And we didn't. Instead, we started with enough to make 44 bets, then did well enough to eventually get nearly 120 bets by using our winnings. Imagine what could have happened if our original bankroll was enough for 120 bets. Yes, with all other considerations being equal, it would have taken 3 times as long to play nearly 3 times the bankroll. But it would not have been unreasonable to think we would have gotten 3 hand pays instead of just 1 taxable jackpot. If so, I would not have been surprised if we would have been able to bet 3 times 120 or 360 bets on that high-limit slot machine. This is all just reasonable guesswork, of course, but it's still reasonable. It follows the patterns for slots play that I know and recognize. But it wouldn't have been worth getting lynched over, and people wanted to move along. It was too much work to win a profit, I guess. In all seriousness, as far as I could tell, these were all entertainment gamblers out for a good time. Their gambling goal was not about making money. So we didn't. But it was entertaining for a little while. One evening, standing next to an active craps table for the very first time, I mentioned to Mark Duvall from the You Can Bet on That podcast of that fact. I am delighted to say he then showed me how to play craps. I'd been listening to his and Dr. Mike's podcast, so I had heard the terminology, but I found it really helpful for someone to point at a spot on the craps table during these explanations. Besides learning how to play craps, I just had to ask Mark, what was a well drink? This is something that he often mentions on his podcast, that so-and-so owes them a well drink. Mark explained what it was, which certainly matched the tone he and Dr. Mike used when talking about well drinks on the show. Speaking of their podcast for the recreational gambler, You Can Bet on That, it is mentioned often enough that Dr. Mike likes to parlay when playing craps. I was again delighted when he parlayed while I was standing between him and Mark being taught craps. In a loud whisper, I said to Mark, "I just heard Dr. Mike say parlay," in an awed voice. Dr. Mike heard and gave me a grin. For me, now and forevermore, that's craps. One question I didn't get answered, because I only thought of it afterwards, is what the heck is going on with taxable jackpots during craps games? Do they get hundreds of them per year like high-limit slots players do? Do they ever happen at all? What about during blackjack and poker? I have reached out to Mark and Dr. Mike to ask that question, and I did learn the answer. Craps players have a different rule. In slots, if you win $1,200 or more, then that becomes a taxable jackpot. But in craps, you only have a taxable jackpot if your odds are 300 to 1 or greater, or you win a jackpot of $5,000 or more, then that becomes a hand pay. They're quite rare. Gamblepalooza was my first meeting event where I met fans from the show. John was there, whom I talked with before as part of a consultation. I spent a significant amount of time with him talking about slots because it was one of my goals for the trip. He was one of my first fans, which I appreciated. With him, I shared everything that went into my last article and more. I also shared it with his friend Michelle, as well as his girlfriend, whom I don't know if she wants her name shared. I'll just call her Professor Amy. John and Amy will know who I mean. In any case, it was great meeting all 3 of them. Thanks, John, for introducing me to them, as well as asking your rather lively and detailed questions. If you have any follow-up questions, do let me know. I also met Ernie, who very earnestly stated that he had listened to every one of my podcast episodes. Wow, that was a big moment for me. I mean, I talk and talk into this empty room around me, but to hear back from someone, wow. Just wow. I also met others, all very nice people. With a couple of people, including a pleasant couple from Canada, we talked about quantum physics. Just a little small talk during that first night. That was wonderful and very relaxing. And then there was some more random people at the event that were also interested in slots. Hugs all around. They seemed to appreciate being able to talk to someone who focused entirely on slots. I'd heard that from others, but it was really evident at this event. The surprise on their faces of finding someone and their breathless questions once they started asking them gave me a strong feeling that I'm starting to make a difference, which is the point, right? Unfortunately, I don't have everyone's names to share. I'll have to do better at that at future events, maybe taking more notes as the days progress. But it was totally wonderful to meet all of you. It keeps me going. In summary, during late April 2018, I attended a gambling broadcaster and fan meetup called Gamblepalooza at Foxwoods Casino in southern New England, hosted by the Cousin Vito Casino podcast. I participated in high-limit group slot pool, was taught to play craps by Mark Duvall, and met fans for the first time. For details on how to win at slots at Foxwoods, be sure to listen to my last podcast episode. During this event, fans requested more trip reports, so I have prepared this Foxwoods Trip Report 2018. More such trip reports will be coming, as well as more articles on the history of slots and winning strategies. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like me to cover, just drop me an email at john@professorslots.com, where John is Jon, or leave a voicemail message on my hotline at 937-696-0086. Remember to visit professorslots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Show notes for this episode are now available within most podcast apps, but are also available on my website at professorslots.com/E31. Up next is the second segment of the show, Nebraska Slot Machine Casino Gambling. In this episode segment, I provide a brief overview of the current state of gambling in a U.S. state, U.S. territory, or U.S. federal district, emphasizing by far anything of interest to slot machine casino gamblers. Here goes. Nebraska slot machine casino gambling is a bit perplexing due to the lack of a state gaming commission to establish clear state gaming regulations. The Nebraska legislature has defined games of chance and gambling very differently from other states. Basically, these legal definitions are highly limited. Nebraska has 21 casinos that offer a total of about 900 video gaming machines. Slot machines are not available, but the relatively poor substitute of video bingo is available along with video keno and video poker electronic gaming machines. No publicly available monthly reports on payout return percentages are available from Nebraska. There is no minimum age for gambling in Nebraska because, as defined by the Nebraska legislature, gambling is illegal and therefore doesn't legally exist. The Nebraska legislature has identified games of chance as being gambling and that all forms of gambling are illegal. However, Nebraska law does not define keno, pickle cards, bingo, the state lottery, racing, or more as being games of chance. Therefore, by state law, these activities do not qualify as gambling. So, again, by Nebraska law, they are not illegal. During this interesting interpretation of games of chance and gambling by the Nebraska legislature, there are truly no legal forms of gambling in Nebraska, but most other states accept definitions of gambling, which would mean that it does exist. So, if you'd like to play a typical electronic gaming device, such as video keno, video poker, or video bingo, then there are about 21 locations in Nebraska that, combined, have nearly 1,000 gaming machines. These locations are casinos, but gambling does not exist there, because, well, that would be illegal. Next up is a usually short statement about slot machine private ownership, which I have included in case you live in this U.S. state and are considering owning a slot machine there. Here it is. In Nebraska, it is illegal to privately own a slot machine. The Nebraska Department of Revenue maintains a charitable gaming division. In 2004, an initiated state statute was proposed, which, if it had not been defeated by 52.78% of those voting, would have created a Nebraska Gaming Commission to regulate gaming. This was called Measure 420, or alternatively the Nebraska Gaming Commission and Casino Regulation Initiative. The measure would have permitted communities to authorize games of chance, and the use of gaming devices at casinos, racetracks, and establishments that sell liquor on the premises. Established in 2010 is a private organization called the Nebraska Gaming Commission. This online resource admits to having no affiliation with the Nebraska government or the U.S. federal government. In this next section, I'll discuss Nebraska gambling establishments. As usual, the website links for each casino, assuming they have set up a website, is available by clicking on this segment in the show notes, available at professorslots.com/E31. The largest casino in Nebraska is the Oya Casino and Resort, having 410 gaming machines and no table games. The second largest is Rosebud Casino, having 250 gaming machines and no table games. Other Nebraska casinos known to have gaming devices include Iron Horse Bar and Casino in Emerson with 87 gaming machines, Lucky 77 Casino in Walt Hill with 64 bingo gaming machines, and Native Star Casino in Winnebago with 88 gaming machines. Besides these 5 casinos with gaming machines, there are 16 other casinos which do not have gaming machines. You can find a list of these casinos in the link in my Nebraska Slot Machine Casino Gambling blog article found in the show notes for this podcast episode at professorslots.com/E31. In summary, Nebraska Slot Machine Casino Gambling consists of 21 casinos that offer 900 video gaming machines such as Video Keno and Video Bingo for slots enthusiasts. Nebraska has not yet established a state gaming commission. Therefore, no publicly available monthly reports on payout return percentages are available for Nebraska. Remember to visit professorslots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Next up is a 5-star review provided by Mousetrip from the U.S. version of iTunes on April 24th, 2018. Its title was Informative and Pleasant. Quote, "With the trip to Vegas planned, I wanted to learn all that I can to increase my chances of making a little more fun money while in the desert. John is a pleasure to listen to. He is easy to understand and presents it slowly and clearly enough to make good use of the information he is sharing. And that's saying something, as he has 8 college degrees. You can tell he genuinely wants listeners to do well and be responsible. I also love the history tidbits, which, knowing these, will just make the whole thing more fun. It's also nice to listen to a Vegas-related podcast that isn't full of F-bombs. Bottom line, he's a nice guy who just wants to share what he has learned. Thanks, John. I'll report back for how I did using your tips." End quote. Thank you so much, Mousetrip. I very much appreciate your kind remarks, and I look forward to hearing how you will do on your trip to Vegas. If you'd like to provide a rating and review for this podcast, which may well help other slots enthusiasts decide to take a listen to one or more of my episodes, simply use your podcast app, visit professorslots.com/Apple Podcasts if you're an Apple device user, or visit professorslots.com/Android for Android users. The next episode of the Professor Slots podcast is entirely about Nevada slot machine casino gambling. It will be a less than brief overview of the current state of gambling in a very important U.S. state, territory, or federal district relative to slot machine gambling. This time, I'll be talking to you exclusively about the great U.S. state of Nevada. That's the end of another great episode of the Professor Slots podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Show notes for this episode can be found within most podcast apps or at professorslots.com/E31. I plan to have the next episode come out very soon for you, where I'll have more amazing content for the show. Until the next episode, have fun, be safe, and make good choices. Bye.